Guys, my name is Ankush Gaurav and I welcome you to Contour series. This tutorial is in continuation with the earlier one where we learned about some of the most important form validation annotations which are supported by Spring MVC like pattern, size, min, max, past, future, etc. with the help of this ultra simple demo application which I created step by step along with you in all the previous tutorials. Now let's proceed further. Guys, what if in this application you have a very special and a unique requirement? What you want is whatever value user would provide here in the student hobby field, that value must be a valid hobby. What I mean by this is if the user provides a value in the student hobby field which would match with any one of these values which you are seeing on the screen and summons the form, then it's all okay. But if he provides a value in the student hobby field which is not present in this list of values and summons the form, at that time the application should return back the same admission form back to the user along with a complete description of the validation error message on top of the web page saying, hey user, please provide a valid hobby in the student hobby field and resubmit the form. So question is how we would do it. Because the problem here is there is no built-in form validation annotation available in the framework which would help us satisfy this unique project requirement. So what we do at this moment? Spring MVC says, hey developers, I provide a list of form validation annotations to you like size, min, max, past, future, etc. But for any specific project requirement, if you do not find any of these useful, you simply go and create your own custom form validation annotation and use it in the project in the similar ways as you use any of the built-in form validation annotations as I showed you in the previous tutorial. Isn't a great feature of Spring MVC? So what I'll do, I'll create my own custom form validation annotation with the name isValidHobby in this application by following these simple steps as suggested by the Spring MVC framework. In order to create a custom form validation annotation, I would first need to include a Java file in the project which would contain some basic information about it, like what's the name I want to give to this custom annotation, what would be the default error message to show to the user in case it invalidates the user input, along with some more basic information about it. And then I would need to include one more Java class in the project which would contain the actual validation logic used by this custom annotation for validating the user input. Guys, after performing these two steps in the project, I'll have a custom annotation ready with me which I would simply use in the similar ways as we use any of the built-in form validation annotations. I'll do one thing, I'll quickly include these two files in the project in order to create isValidHobby custom annotation, and later I would explain every single thing to you in detail. Cool. So here I've included these two Java files in the project which together would provide me with a custom annotation with the name isValidHobby. Now let's understand in detail what I've actually written in these two files. Here in this Java file, I've provided the complete definition of the custom form validation annotation. Whatever name we would provide here to the file, that would become the name of the custom form validation annotation. And here, this is the default error message to be shown to the user on the response web page in case this annotation invalidates the user input. And with this statement, I'm simply telling Spring MVC framework, hey Spring MVC framework, for this annotation, you use this validator class to validate the user input. And here is the complete logic which it would use to validate the user input. It's simply saying if the user input matches with any of these values, then it's a valid input. Otherwise, it's an invalid input. So with these two classes in this project, I'm now ready to use isValidHobby annotation. So what I'll do, in the student class, on top of student hobby field, I would write isValidHobby annotation. So after putting this annotation on top of student hobby field, the user would provide values in this form and submit the form, the request would reach to this request handler method. And here, this model attribute annotation would automatically bind all these form elements values with the corresponding properties of student object. And here, while performing this task, isValidHobby annotation would try to validate the user input for student hobby field, that is for this value, using this logic. And if it finds the student hobby value matching with any of these values, then it would consider it as a valid input for student hobby field. Otherwise, it would treat it as an invalid input. Let me show you this working on the browser by submitting the form with music as a value for student hobby field. Cool. As expected, the application has happily accepted this value. Why? Because music is present in this list of values. Now let's check what would happen if I provide a value in the student hobby field, say AAA, which is not present in this list of values for student hobby. Cool. The application has rejected this value and it's saying please provide a valid hobby value with this error message. In the next tutorial, I'll talk something advanced related to the concept of custom form validation annotation. Guys, a big thank you for learning Spring MVC framework with me. If you have any feedback or comments, please provide them below the video or simply write to me on this email ID for all of your queries. Please hit the like button if you really like this video, and do not forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel Contour Series, and I'm gonna catch you in my next tutorial.